All right. So the chances are, if you're a new hunter, or even if you've been hunting for a while, you have made one of these 5 mistakes. And I know that I have. And I feel like before hunting season, we should go over them and try to keep these mistakes as low as possible so we can get on some deer. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is stand location. You can mess up so much just for a stand location, whether it's hard to get a good wind, or it's just a bad setup overall. So you want to be careful of this, especially in that earlier season, because I know a lot of people, you always hear don't hunt October mornings. And although that is true to a point, you can hunt those mornings if you have the right setup. But if you're someone who just doesn't have a lot of time, and maybe you only can hunt on the weekends or whatever, you want to be in the woods as much as possible. So be mindful of those setups, because you don't want to mess your spot up in October, and then come November, the best time of year, you have nothing. So be mindful of your stand locations. A lot of things that I see is in those early season time frames, a lot of people are setting up over food. So although that is good for an afternoon sit, maybe a morning sit isn't going to be ideal, because those deer are going to be out there feeding as you're walking into the stand. So number 2 is going to be over calling. So this is a pretty common mistake for new hunters. Going out and you go to your local store, you tell the guy that you're getting into hunting, and he brings you the grunt call, he brings you the black rack, he brings you the can call, especially that can call. Don't overcall. So you see a lot of differing opinions. Some people they call all the time. Some people don't call at all. And this is really dependent on where you live. So if you're hunting a big private piece of property, the deer don't get a lot of pressure, maybe you can snort wheeze at that deer until he either comes in or goes away, and he's not going to be spooked. Or maybe on another property, maybe you're hunting public somewhere, and now you do a snort wheeze or whatever, and now that deer's like, okay, that guy's there, I'm not going over there. I personally am not a huge fan of calling, because I feel like you see that buck, and now you're telling him that buck cannot be downwind of everything at once. So when you call, you give him a location that he needs to go get downwind of, and that's what he's going to try to do, is get downwind. So calling, it can work, but be mindful and do not overcall. All right. Number 3 is going to be not knowing how to read sign. You have to learn how to read sign. You go into the spot, you don't want to, you see a rub on a tree and you're like, yep, there's a rub, let me set up. No. You want to go in, you want to see how fresh it is. You walk up to a rub on a tree, okay, how deep is this rub? Is there big gouges in the tree, or is it just a little slick spot that, a basket rack 6 left? Or is there tree shavings still on the ground to show that it's been used recently? Or you walk up to a scrape. You go to the scrape. Is it old? Is there moisture in it from where they peed in the scrape? Or does it look like the dirt is freshly turned? Is this track real splayed out? Like a doe, you may have like a perfect track, but maybe a big buck, it kind of splays out a little bit because all that weight there. So you have to be really diligent in reading sign, and you need to go up to it and investigate it. And don't just post up on the first sign that you see. follow the sign back. Go see if you can get closer to their bedding area. And maybe, you may jump a deer, but now that's a bedding area. And now you jump this deer. Now you know you need to set up 40, 50 yards further. So number four is going to be not practicing enough for the shot you're really going to take. And this more pertains to the archery side. But man, you always see people, okay, they go and practice in their backyard, but they're practicing, they have their target set up, they're standing perfectly, perfect form, the target's broadside, everything's perfect. But in reality, you rarely have perfect opportunities. Number one, most people usually practice from the ground. Well, most people are usually shooting a deer from a tree. So that would be one thing to start working on, is try to get some elevation. Another thing is that deer is not always going to be perfectly broadside, and you're not going to always have a completely wide open area to shoot through. And it's not going to be perfect. You're not always going to be able to be standing up and being in perfect form. Sometimes you may be lean in one way or the other. Sometimes you may have to crouch down a little bit. So practice from those odd positions to really give yourself a good chance, because you get out in the tree and now you're trying to squat down and shoot. Well, you've never done that before. So, what are the odds that you're going to make a good shot? So let's go ahead and get into the final one. All right, so this last one is going to have to do with after you shoot your deer, your tracking. So, a lot of people, generally is what I see, they shoot a deer, they sit in the stand for 20 minutes, they get down, they go retrieve their arrow, and maybe they go back to the truck, they give the deer an hour, and they're going to stomp around looking for the deer. Don't do that unless you've made a perfect shot. And this is also for rifle hunters as well. You shoot your deer, give you a second to calm down, and think back, what was your initial reaction whenever you shot that deer? 9 times out of 10, your initial reaction is going to be what really happened. Because a lot of times what we'll do is we'll start thinking, we'll be like, your initial reaction is, well, I hit that deer a little bit back. And then, as an hour goes by, you're thinking, well, maybe that arrow did go in there and it hit a lung, or it hit the lung and the liver. So think back to that initial reaction, and whatever that was, I would base your tracking job off of that. The next thing that has to do with tracking is people get too caught up on stereotypes, such as an example, a gut shot deer always goes to water. I'm not saying you won't find them around water, but don't think that just because you hit this deer in the guts, you need to go stomping through and go over to that pond. Maybe do that after you've done your tracking job and you haven't come up with anything, maybe. But don't get caught up on these stereotypes that a deer is shot here, so this is where it's probably at. Because there are plenty of times where that doesn't happen. I've had plenty of shots where I've shot a deer and, for example, a gut shot deer. I shot a deer in the guts a couple years ago with my bow, and immediately there's one pond on the property. Immediately I'm like, okay, this deer probably ended up at the pond. No, it ran the opposite direction of the pond. But you know what it did do? What they usually do most times, and still this isn't true, is they go to where they feel safe. And a lot of times, that's why you see a lot of times you shoot a deer and it'll turn back and go back the way it came. Not every time, but a lot of times it will do that because it came from that way. Obviously, they were over there for some reason and they felt it was safe over there. So that's where they're going after their hit. So that's going to do it. Just remember, every hunter makes mistakes. It's part of the learning curve. It happens to all of us. Just be diligent, and just remember these, and the less mistakes you make, the closer you are to shooting that big buck. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and peace out.